beginning chapter 8 that focuses on deductive arguments, but more specifically, we're focusing on what we call categorical logic. Categorical logic. The next chapter, chapter 9, is going to focus on what we call truth-functional logic. Truth-functional logic. And I think they also call it sentential logic. But in this chapter, we're focused on categorical logic. And this view is generally understood as coming from Aristotle. It's an old approach to logic, classic approach. And one of the values of learning both categorical and truth-functional logic is that it helps us understand the logic of everyday language. And we're going to get in the practice of translating arguments from ordinary language into the form of categorical logic, where we can make sense of the truth values and we can more clearly understand the validity of an argument and its soundness. And so what we'll be doing in this chapter is developing our ability to translate arguments from ordinary language into categorical logic. Now, this is not an easy thing to do. Understand the logical implications of ordinary language. Sometimes you think it's clear, but it's not so clear. Let me give you some examples. Are these the same thing? Number 1 and number 2. Everybody who is ineligible for Physics 1A must take Physical Science 1. Number 2, no students who are required to take Physical Science 1 are eligible for Physics 1A. Are they equivalent? Do they say the same thing? No. Yes, sir. No. Correct. Not quite. They might seem close, but logically their implications are different. Another example. Harold won't attend the meeting unless Vanessa decides to go. Oh, this sounds interesting. If Vanessa decides to go, then Harold will attend the meeting. Do these mean the same thing? Jerry?
I think so.
No?
No?
Not quite.
Oh.
There could be, Harold won't go to the meeting unless Vanessa decides to go. There could be other qualifications. Harold might not go unless Vanessa goes and brings her sister.
What?
That's
But it doesn't say that.
Well, it doesn't say completely what will determine whether Harold goes. This is merely a sufficient condition, a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. There might need to be other things that will lead Harold to go.
But how would we know that?
Well, it's because that's what the sentence says, and we'll get in the practice of making those distinctions when we translate these statements into categorical logic. And the whole point will be, when we make these translations, we'll be better able to make these determinations, whether statements are equivalent. Once we translate it into the categorical form, it will be obvious to us. It will be obvious. That's the goal, to make the logical implications of our statements clear. The answer is no. Both of these are not quite the same. Now, categorical claims are going to say something about categories or classes of things. And there's a standard form that they all engage in. And let's just put, all S are P, no S are P, some S are P, and some S are not P. These are the 4 forms of categorical statements, and they correlate to these letters. An A statement is of this form. All teachers are very smart. You can say it's not true. No bananas grow in the North Pole. Some students are extremely intelligent. Some students are not. And so the idea is that these are the 4 standard forms of categorical statements. And one of the first things that we're going to develop an ability to do is to translate statements from ordinary language into one of these forms. And once we get it into one of these forms, then we'll be much easier, we'll be in a better position to determine whether the logical implications of statements are equal. It'll make it clearer to us. So A-E-I-O, 4 standard forms of categorical statements. Now, in these categorical claims, we're going to have terms. And terms are the phrases that go in the blanks. Only nouns or noun phrases. We're talking about these blanks. So terms go into these blanks, and there's going to be 2 of them with each categorical statement. A subject term and a predicate term. Subject term is going to go here, predicate term goes here. S and P. So all categorical statements are going to have 2 terms, a subject and a predicate term. Now, here's how these statements can be mapped out in Venn diagrams. If we say that all S are P, then we're saying that what's in the red is empty. And all of the S are going to be in this section here. So if we make an A statement, all S are P, that can be conveyed through this Venn diagram, which illustrates there is no part of S that is not in P. Okay, if I was to know SRP, how would this Venn diagram be different? Correct. If we say no S is P, then the red part would be here, and all of S would be out there. Now, what if I said that some S are P? Now, the way we do that, I should tell you, it's not like this. With this X, we convey that some of S is in this area right here. Mary?
Could you explain A, all S are P?
So the idea is that all of the things that are in S are also in P. So the red is designating that there's nothing in this area. All of S is in this area that's also in P. So the red means there's nothing there.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
I was confused about that too, but I get it.
Yeah, so the red means that nothing's there, and an X means there's just something there. We know that there's something there. So all S are P, no S are P, some S are P, and then what's the last one? Anybody remember? Some S are not P. Now how would we convey that by the Venn diagram? Right there. Correct.
Are you trying to
So then would you put, for A, would you put the X?
A wouldn't have an X involved.
Because it would be in both, or in the middle and on
A
the
wouldn't
other.
have an X involved because X is merely conveyed that there's some S in this area here. With an A or an E, we use the red to show that there's nothing here at all. And so that all of S is out here. Mary?
By saying that no S's are P, but why is P empty then?
P is not empty. The red is empty. The white is full. The red is empty. The white is full. So the only S that we have is the S outside of P. How you doing, Q? Make sense to you?
Yeah.
Miller, pretty clear?
Clear?
Cool. So the game plan when we do these translations is to take a statement and then see, is that an all S or P or a some S or P or some S or not P? We're going to try to think about which categorical claim our ordinary language most closely associates with. Now, which ones make affirmative affirmative claims, affirm something.
All SRP and some SRP.
Right. So A and I claims are going to be affirmative, and then the other two obviously are negative. No S or P, E claim, and an O claim, some S are not P. Some. So you have some affirmative claims too, and some negative claims, E and O. So one of the things that we're going to be involved in this chapter is translating claims from ordinary language or arguments into this standard form. Now, claims are going to be what we call equivalent, and we were asking that question about those claims early on in the chapter. Claims are going to be equivalent if and only if they would be true in all and exactly the same circumstances. Essentially, they're going to have the same truth values. They're going to be true in the same situations. They mean the same thing when they have the same truth values. So that's what we're looking at in logic. When we say are two claims equivalent, that's going to mean that they essentially have the same truth values associated with them. They're always true in the cases where they're true. The two of them agree in that sense. And here's an interesting element when we engage in these translations. All standard form claims are going to be in present tense. And so part of the translation is going to be translating, if people make claims in past tense, you're going to be translating them into present tense. And always keep that in mind, that when we put claims in standard form, they're always going to be in present tense. That doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about the past. We can use categorical logic to talk about the past. We're simply going to translate it into present tense. Some creatures that lived in North America are creatures that weighed more than 4 tons. Here, you know, it's in, you can translate this into present tense. Now this relationship obtains, but you're referring to something that happened in the past. Essentially, the idea is that you have to translate. When you put them in categorical form, you're going to put them into present tense. Now, what would the steps be that we take to take an argument made by Newt Gingrich and translate it into categorical form, assuming that that's possible? Right? Assuming that that's possible. Well, first, you want to identify the terms. For example, if I say only sophomores are eligible candidates, what are the 2 terms that we're referring to here? Yes, sir?
Sophomores and eligible candidates.
Correct. Sophomores and eligible candidates. Now, the second step is going to be, after we define the terms, we want to try to decide what kind of statement is being made and identify the type of claim that is made, A, E, I, or U, or O claim. Now, only sophomores are eligible candidates. First, I had the answer up there, but what claim is that? Correct, yeah. Now the key is, now which A claim would correctly be a correct translation? And it's not so easy. So we go, only sophomores are eligible candidates, and we want to put that in an all S or P, no S or P, some S or P, some S or not P. All right, so we've decided on an A claim, which all S or P. But how are we going to phrase that? All sophomores are eligible candidates, or all eligible candidates are sophomores. All eligible candidates are sophomores. And actually, later on, we're going to learn that when term is preceded by an only, you'll find that you're introducing the predicate. If it's preceded by a the only, then you're introducing the subject. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so here you see the first two steps. Identify the terms, then you try to identify the categorical claim that is most closely associated with the claim being made in ordinary language. In this particular case, the restriction is placed on the class of eligible candidates. So it's going to be the subject class, eligible candidates. And here, only sophomores are eligible candidates. So you're saying only this group can be a part of eligible candidates. So the idea is that if you put a restriction on a class, it's going to be the subject class. And we'll talk more about that in the future. But step one, identify the terms. Step two, identify the categorical claim that is most closely associated with the claim being made in ordinary language. Now, here's what I was talking about before. We go into a little more detail on how you can determine the terms, whether they're the subject and the predicate. And here it's interesting. All claims that take the form the only X's are Y's should be translated into all X's are Y's. But there's got to be a the only here. The idea is the phrase the only introduces the subject term of an A claim. By the way, I've posted this presentation along with the presentation for Chapter 9 on the course homepage in MyMC. Can you pull that up in there? Yeah. So you don't need to take notes unless you find it helpful for you. Unless you find it helpful. So if a term is preceded by the only, then you know that it's in the it's a subject term. If a word or phrase is preceded by just only, used by itself, then it introduces the predicate term of an A claim. Let's consider an example. Let's consider an example. Only matinees are half-priced shows. Only matinees are half-priced shows. How would we phrase that in a categorical claim? Miller.
Would it be the only half-price shows are matinees?
Correct. 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 And the same is true for this. Matinees are the only half-priced shows. Now, once again, if the only precedes a claim, then we know it's a subject term. So this has to be the subject term, this has to be the predicate term, and that's exactly what we get. So an easy rule of thumb, the only, got a predicate, excuse me, subject. I'm looking right at the thing, I'm calling it wrong. So the only precedes the subject term. Only by itself precedes the predicate term. Little key to help you in your translations. Here's an interesting element. When we refer to times, it gets a little funky. I always get nervous when I take logic quizzes. How would we phrase this in standard form? Well, it's a claim about times. So the proper translation is going to be all times I take logic exams are times I get nervous. Yeah. And there are some other funky things about translations. When we refer to people, we'll see some of this. But when we refer to a time, we have to make that explicit. And we say, all times I take logic tests, or times I get nervous. Yes, ma'am?
So the reason why the first example wouldn't necessarily be as valid is because there's a form, is because it could be ambiguous, or because they could be like more that could be added to it.
Well, I think the idea is that this phrasing makes it more explicit what we're referring to. And we're referring to this time that this occurs. And at this time, then this other thing happens. One might argue that the times is implicit up here. I always get nervous when I take logic exams. The term when makes it clear you're referring to a time. So you could say that this is implicit in this.
So the second one is just, I guess, stipulated in comparison to the first one.
Say that again?
The second one is like more like a stipulated definition in comparison to the first one.
Stipulative definition. That's close, but not quite right, I would argue, because you're not changing the definition at all. You are simply making more explicit what is stated here.
Okay.
So a stipulative definition might change the definition a little bit for this one essay. This is not changing anything. It's really making more explicit what is already in this statement.
Okay.
That's the idea in any case. So when we implicitly refer to times in ordinary language when we make arguments, when we translate it into categorical forms, we have to make it explicit that we are referring to times. And so all times I go on a date with a beautiful woman are times that I never get nervous. And by putting times in there, you make it more explicit what you're referring to. You're laughing, Michael. You're laughing. When the term whenever is used, it is often a clue that you're talking about times or occasions. When or whenever, I think. And here's another little funky element of categorical logic. The use of times is kind of funky. And this is weird too. Claims about single individuals. Consider this claim that Michael is a logician. Michael is a logician. Okay, categorical claims are always about two classes, and Michael is not a class. He's a classy guy, but he's not a class. So, how do we translate this statement that Michael is a logician into a statement about classes? Logicians are a class, they're a group. But Michael is not a group. How do we do this? We should treat such claims as if they were claims, they were about classes with exactly one member in them. So the class of, how do we put this? All people identical with Michael are logicians. So that's as weird as times, to be honest with you. So you create a class that is identical with Michael. And in that way, you create a class that is identical with the term in that original statement. So anytime you refer to a person, when you translate it into categorical form, you have to translate it into that term into a term that refers to a class that is identical with that individual. Any questions with how we translate individual people? All people identical with Aristotle are logicians. Claims about single individuals should be treated as A claims or E claims. Why can't they be I or O claims?
Because they talk about some, which implies there's more than one.
Correct.
in the group. Correct.
So it's not possible to say that how would you say that? All people identical, some people identical with Michael are logicians. Yeah, you can't. Since it's a class of one, you can't refer to some. It's always got to be all. See that? So when we're individuals, it has to be treated as an A claim or an E claim, not an I or an O. Unless Michael's schizophrenic. Then you might have an issue. All the people identical with Michael, some of the people identical with Michael think he's a logician.
Or all the Michaels.
But, what am I saying? Talking to himself.
The axe murderer, Michael.
Am I a logician? Today I am.
An axe murderer.
A false A claim about an individual implies a true E claim. So if we say that all people identical with Michael are logicians is false, then we're saying that no people identical with Michael are logicians. So a false A claim implies a true E claim when we're referring to individuals. Comments or questions about dealing with individuals? So when we deal with times, that's a little funky. We've got to refer to all times that this occurs. And then when we're referring to individuals, we have to make a class that is identical with that individual in order to be consistent with categorical logic. Now, by the way, this is going to be part of the reason why we go to propositional logic. In order to make these translations, some people think we've got to alter things a little too much. And so they create another form of logic where there is not such a need for that translation. But here, the idea is that by making this translation, we make the logical implications of our statements much more clear and much easier to understand. Now, claims about objects, occasions, and places. They often require the same kind of translation as claims about individuals. That meaning that you have to create a class that is identical to what you are referring to in that subject term. Example, St. Louis is on the Mississippi. St. Louis is on the Mississippi. Now, how might we translate that into a categorical form? Anybody have any ideas?
All cities.
Q?
All cities like St. Louis? Can I say like St. Louis?
All cities
Identical.
logical.
Okay.
All cities identical with St. Louis are cities on the Mississippi. Once again, you have to create a class. All of those cities identical to St. Louis, which there is only one, right, are cities on the Mississippi. So once again, the whole focus here is to try to translate things into a categorical form where you're referring to a class. And even when you're referring to a time, an individual, or a place, you're going to have to create a class. All times, all people, all places identical with that term that you're referring to. And so it's really not complicated. All we're really trying to do is to create categories or classes. And sometimes in ordinary language, we're not really referring to a class. Mass nouns refer to a quantity of a kind of stuff. Consider this example before lunch. Boiled okra is too ugly to eat.
They make boiled okra?
I know.
Yes, they do. Yes,
In
they
Jamaican
do.
soup, we use
What?
Really?
Okra.
Yeah, that's just really good.
I thought they only made fried okra.
No,
don't
look
know
at
what
y'all. Okra is better than fried okra. And you
Look,
have
I
that with
had
some
okra.
fish. You have that with some tilapia. Remember tilapia? Banging.
with some red
You want
snapper.
to boil okra so
Yeah,
that we
but
can
you know you
suck
put
every
some
flavor out of it, so you just get the.
Stop trying to fry
Get
everything.
the okra nest. But boiled okra is too ugly to eat. Now, you should treat the statement as a claim about examples of this kind of stuff. And so we'll create a class out of the examples of this kind of stuff. So translation, all examples of boiled okra. So right there you're creating a class. All examples of boiled okra are things that are too ugly to eat. Is boiled
If you
okra,
said foods, would that be wrong?
excuse me?
Would you say foods instead of things? Would that be wrong?
All foods,
No, all examples of boiled okra are foods that are too ugly to eat.
that doesn't change anything, that would be acceptable.
Oh, okay.
Except some might consider boiled okra not a food, it's so ugly.
It's not ugly.
By the way, is it ugly when you boil it?
No, it's not ugly. It's good.
Discrimination against vegetables.
Exactly.
Is okra a vegetable?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, it's seeds.
When you fry it, it's more.
Is it identical with the examples of a vegetable?
Yes, it is.
All right, so mass nouns. We're once again going to have to create a category out of them. And here the idea is boiled okra is a mass noun. It refers to all examples of boiled okra that are out there. So once again, we're going to make explicit what's already there in ordinary language by saying that all examples of boiled okra, this category, are things that are too ugly to eat. So we're going to keep in mind times and how we refer to all times that I take a quiz, I get nervous. And then we're going to keep in mind individuals. We're going to have to make a class out of those individuals. All students identical with Michael will be that class. And then when we take places, we're going to have to make a category out of places. So if we make reference to Montgomery County, then when we translate that, we're going to have to refer to all counties that are identical with Montgomery County. So we're making a category out of places, and then with mass nouns, we're making a category out of their examples. And so if I refer to all football players are
Dumb jocks.
Tyler said it. Tyler, this guy over here.
Wow.
I mean, it's a stereotype.
So how do we trans all football players are dumb jocks, I think is the statement that Tyler Shepard made. Now, so Tyler, how do we translate this into the standard form? You can't just refer to all NFL players. Well, what do we say? Now it's that's a mass noun that refers to people. So I guess examples. All examples of NFL football players are examples of people who are dumb as a brick.
Wow.
Or whatever Tyler Shepard said, I forgot exactly what the claim was. But once again, you're creating a category. You're creating a category. All right. Now it is time for you to know. Are you in a hurry, Richard?
You got a hot date?
And he always gets nervous.
Why does the date have to be hot?
When this is a time. No, wait, how you
Why
phrase it?
can't they be?
All times is Richard.
I wasn't saying.
Shots
I
Are you
was
fired.
talking
suggesting
about
that's a logical possibility that he has to
Shots
take?
fired.
Now, how would we phrase that if you say it's not possible for Richard to have a date?
If Richard is having a date, it's impossible for
Now, first of all, it's Richard, so it's all people identical with Richard. We're going to create a class.
All of it.
Rush Limbaugh and Richard Nunn.
Oh, God.
And then if we say all the times that Richard has a date, then it's got to be empty in there. The Venn diagram. We'll have to work on that. We need to become intimately familiar with the square of opposition. The square of opposition tells us the logical interrelation between all of these categories of claims. If one is true, what are the other ones? Well, if you have a true statement on the top, every S is P, you can deduce the truth value of every other corresponding categorical claim. And by understanding the square of opposition and the logical interrelation between the parts of it, you can definitely better understand the logical implications of every claim you make. You can see how all S, if all S is indeed P, well, that means that some S has to be P. So you know that this claim must be true. If this claim is true, you know this claim must be true. If this claim is true, you know that one has to be false. And you also know that this one has to be false. In fact, let's take a look at one of these. I have an example here. Consider the claim. All serious remarks by Paris Hilton are hopeless cliches. All serious remarks by Paris Hilton are hopeless cliches. Now, first of all, what kind of categorical claim is that? Okay. Correct. It's an A claim. All S is P. All S is P. And this A claim is true. So as I mentioned, we should be able to deduce the truth value of all the corresponding categorical claims. So if it is the case that all serious remarks made by Paris Hilton are hopeless cliches, what is the truth value of the corresponding O claim? And first of all, what would the O claim be?
Some remarks by Paris Hilton are not hopeless cliches.
Correct. And what is the truth value of the O claim?
If A is true, then none.
If A is true, then the value is what? False. Correct. Correct. So if, and that is always true, contradictories always have opposite truth values. Okay, so if the A claim is true, then the O claim is false, the I claim is true, and the E claim is false. And what we find is that there are these logical relationships between the truth values in each case. First of all, contraries. Contraries can both be false, but cannot both be true. So if one is true, the other has to be false. And that is always the case with contraries. The contraries are up here on the top. Subcontrary claims are down here. And the interrelation between them is that both can both be true, but cannot both be false. So if one is false, you know that the other has to be true. Contradictories, right here, they never have the same truth value. So if we have the truth value of one categorical claim, we can often deduce the truth value of the three corresponding claims using the square of opposition. But that's not always the case. A true claim at the top of the square enables you to deduce the truth values of the other three claims. The same is true of a false claim on the bottom. If you start with a false claim on the bottom, then you can deduce all of the other truth values. However, a false claim on the top or a true claim on the bottom only enables you to deduce the truth value of the contradictory claim. So if you have a false claim, if it was the case, and it couldn't possibly be, that it is not true that all the things that Paris Hilton says are hopeless cliches, the only thing we could deduce is that the O is going to have an opposite truth value, and that is that some of the things that Paris Hilton says are not hopeless cliches, and that would be true, but you couldn't deduce any of the other truth values. So if there's a false claim on the top or a true claim on the bottom, then you can only deduce the truth value of the contradictory claims. Now, we covered a lot of information today, and we're going to review a lot of it after we have a great Thanksgiving, eat a lot of turkey, and have a great time. I'll
Eat
see
a
you
lot of oxtail.
after Thanksgiving.